Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi, selamat sejahtera. Pada kali ini, kita akan membincangkan bab 3, Seni Catan. Dalam tajuk ini, kita akan membincangkan media, teknik, aliran serta pelukis dan karya seni catan tempatan. Ini adalah antara bahan dan peralatan yang kita gunakan dalam seni catan, pewarna, ejen pelarut dan alatan. Kita lihat jadual berikut, jenis media, bahan tara, alatan, jenis permukaan dan teknik. Kita ada cat air, cat poster, cat akrilik, cat minyak, cat gouache, cat tempera, fresco. Ada antaranya menggunakan air sebagai bahan tara dan ada yang menggunakan minyak. Seterusnya kita akan pergi kepada teknik-teknik untuk menghasilkan catan. Teknik yang pertama ialah pointillisme, menggunakan teknik titik-titik secara berulang-ulang kali dengan menggunakan hujung berus. yang kedua ialah teknik ala prima menggunakan cat minyak yang diambil terus dari tiub dan disapu secara spontan.
All right, so as usual, I am just sketching in burnt sienna, and I'm squinting at the image and mapping out the dark areas. I'm trying to just get an interesting pattern here, and then I'm suggesting some tree trunks as well, just so I know where those are going to be. It gives me a kind of an idea of what the overall composition is going to look like. And then I can come in, as I am here, with my darks first, which is ultramarine and alizarin crimson. And this mixture has been thinned with mineral spirits. And as you can see, I'm kind of scrubbing it into the panel. I want a thin layer of paint because I'm going to come over it later with thicker paint. So if this layer is too thick, I will not be able to come over it. So here I am also suggesting some trunks, just sort of the dark portions of the trunks. And now I'm coming in with a bit more color into those dark areas. I'm getting a little reflection there, so it's showing up as lighter than it really is. But what I'm trying to do is reinforce the darks and add a little bit of variety into those shadow colors. So I'm adding, like, pretty much looks like straight ultramarine there, maybe with a touch of white in it. And like I said, just reinforcing the darks and also lightening the darks that are, for the trees that are in the distance, like right there, kind of trying to lighten those up so that I'll push them back. Okay, so now I'm coming in with the sky color. And this paint has been thinned just a touch with mineral spirits to make it workable, but it is not a scrub in like the dark in the trees were. This is, I want to thin it to get good coverage, and I want a little bit of the panel to show through, like the light, the white of the panel to show through. It gives you kind of some illumination in the sky. And then I am going to come in and touch up the sky holes. I've already done one there. You want your trees to have, like, to be able to see the sky, like right there. See, those are, putting in little touches of sky behind the trees. You want your trees not to be solid masses because it just does not look real. Next here, what I'm doing is, this is kind of challenging. I'm going to paint the water. And obviously I've got all these tree trunks and I'm trying to get a straight line with the water, but I'm not really worried about it. I'm not worried that it's going to look sloppy or anything. That's part of how I like to paint. So I just do the best I can. Now I'm coming in with the sky on the horizon and trying to preserve some of the trunks. Although if I lose them, it's not a problem because I'm going to come back in later, and reinforce those. And I like there to be a bit of messiness going on. So I don't like it to be too perfect or too careful, as you guys probably know. All right, so here I am coming in, again, with about the same consistency as the sky, just like, it's pretty much paint out of the tube, just slightly loosened up. All right, now, the same thing with this paint right here. Just a touch of mineral spirits to make it workable, but I'm preserving the thickness. And as you can see, I'm going right over that dark paint, and it's not blending that much. There may be a little blending going on, but it's not too bad. If that dark blue I had laid in earlier was thick, there's no way I could come over and cover, get those little pops of green. So now I'm coming in and putting some highlights on the trunks, and I just mixed up kind of some sort of warm gray mixture. And putting the light areas of the trunks in. And I'm not worried about duplicating what I'm seeing exactly. I'm just trying to create a random assortment of trunks, and then I can fine tune them later. But yeah, I really want to get that main tree in because that's kind of the center of interest. And again, look, I'm able to go over that dark blue paint with light paint and it's staying clean. I'm not getting any kind of mixture going on at all. And that's because that first layer of dark was very thin, just kind of scrubbed in. And then it's no problem to come over with thicker paint on top of that. Now I'm coming in with some more, like some green highlights. Same thing, loading up the brush with paint and maybe a touch of mineral spirits to thin it, but barely any. I want to keep that paint thick. Now for some of the smaller tree trunks in the background, I'm using a liner brush. This is a number 4 synthetic, inexpensive brush, nothing fancy, and just kind of suggesting more pops of color or light on the trunks. And yeah, trying to, again, trying to keep it very loose and not be fussy at all. I mean, as much as possible anyway. And then also trying not to break up that dark pattern too much. I want to maintain those dark shapes. So yeah, this little brush, now I'm using a little bit of medium with the little brush, and I'll talk about that. It's a mixture of stand oil and linseed oil and mineral spirits. Here I've come in and just kind of added some white paint to the sky to just lighten it up a bit. And I'm intentionally mixing the white with the sky color that's already on the panel. So I'm mixing on the panel a bit. All right, so as usual, I will do a few touch-ups on this painting, kind of live with it for a little bit. After it's dry, I can come in, punch up the lights, do whatever I need to do compositionally. But just wanted to give you this quick wet-on-wet demo.
Teknik yang ketiga ialah teknik glazing. Sapuan berus secara bersahaja untuk mewujudkan kesan warna yang licin dan berkilau.
Hi there, it's Sandy Alnock for Ellen Hutson, and I bring you another in the series of watercolor tips. Today we're going to talk about glazes. And glazing is something that other people may refer to as layering of color or putting a flat wash over another color. And that is all the same kind of an idea, the same kind of technique. I'm starting out by putting a coat of Hansa Yellow Light over this little grid of squares, and I want to alter the color. So with glazing, you can alter the color, you can add shading, you can add texture, lots of different things that this technique can be used for. But I'm going to start by painting and then completely drying the Hansa Yellow Light. You don't want it to be wet at all because wet will cause different effects in the next layer of paint that comes on here. But I'm going to do a very flat wash of this new gamboge right over top of the Hansa Yellow Light to alter the color. I'm going to alter it also with the quinacridone rose with a very soft wash of it. You could go even softer and make it a lighter peach. This will be a really pretty peach when it dries. And you can test that out on scratch paper to find out what different colors layering looks like and what the glazing will do to the color underneath. With each one of these, I'm letting it dry completely in between the colors next to them because I don't want them to bleed as well. So lots of drying time going on, and I'm making sure my brush is completely filled with the color that's going on the top. If there's water in my brush and not just the paint color, then if I press down on the brush, it's going to dump water out into the paint and make it bloom, or it will make it lighten, and that is an effect you want to have under control. And if you want to have your color be a nice solid flat wash, a solid glaze, then you want to make sure the whole brush is filled with the actual paint and not with water. I'm using New Gamboge over both of these yellow balloons. One of them was Hansa Yellow Light, and this is New Gamboge over New Gamboge. So you can add a second layer of depth and color and richness by putting a glaze of a color over top of the color that you've already finished. And again, once they're completely dry. My red balloon didn't come out nearly as contrasting as I had wanted. So what I did was to mix a little bit of green, which is the complement of red, with the red paint mixture that I had in my palette. And when I did that, I painted it wet in wet into the glaze I already had there. I could have actually mixed that color up in the first place and continued painting to create that without having to do the wet in wet technique. And it would have come out much smoother rather than looking like a lumpy balloon like it does right now. The green and the teal balloons are next, and I'm doing the same thing with them, just adding another layer of the same color that had been down below them. I also want to apologize for that horrible blue background. I am terrible at flat washes. I can't tell you how many times I had to shoot this video to try to get one where I had a decent blue wash. And for whatever reason, I was really struggling with this. So I want to encourage you that this happens to people who are experienced at watercolor as well as those who are new. So if you do struggle with flat washes, just work at it and practice in real world context. And what I mean by that is I'm coloring here with balloons. I'm not just trying to practice on squares. I'm doing actual balloons and backgrounds and those sorts of things. So then if you actually end up coming out with a really great wash on your image, you could use it on a card or something and not just have a wash in a little swatch book for yourself somewhere. So here is the graphic that I have for you for today. It's pinnable and it's on the Ellen Hutson blog. Link is in the description down below, and you can go add to your watercolor knowledge that you're collecting on Pinterest. And I will talk to you guys later. See you next week with another watercolor tip.
Seterusnya teknik scumbling. Kita mulai dengan warna gelap, kemudian ditindan dengan warna cerah secara terkawal untuk menimbulkan kesan luksina. Kita tengok video.
Hi, I'm Sandy Allnock here for Ellen Hutson with another watercolor tip. Today we're going to talk about scumbling, which is my Bob Ross technique. I have been told that I'm the Bob Ross of modernity, but I love to make scenes with trees and natural things behind them, and scumbling is one of the techniques that makes that happen. And I want to show you that. Here I'm using a number 2 brush because I have really small images to work with, but you can use larger brushes if you're using larger images and you want larger patterns. But this little French hen has feathers on him that are turning into feathers because I'm dancing the brush across the surface. Basically just scribbling, and it doesn't take a lot of talent to scribble. Anybody can do that. So I'm also going to scribble on the ground. I had this pre-watercolored with a base color, so I'm just going over with a glaze of another color. My pencil line was there and I realized I should probably cover that up. So as I'm working on this, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Just a little aside for you. Once you have watercolor over something, you usually can't erase that pencil line. So you want to do that before you start painting. Don't ask me how I know, I just proved it to you, right? So the pencil line is not disappearing. So I had a plan in mind that I will enact in just a moment for you. But I'm dancing the brush with this lighter color over the ground just to make it look like rocks and dirt. It's a very simple way to finish off an image and give a stamped image somewhere to stand and a little place to stand. So card makers, take note. It's a great way to make it look like you know what you're doing and just add a little scumbling to the ground. And with this darker color that I'm adding, you really can't see that pencil line anymore. Yay! I did the same thing over here. I watercolored that washy background. And the colors that are behind these, as I'm doing this, those are very dry. If you do your scumbling over top of wet paint, it's basically dropping wet paint into wet paint. And it's going to soften out and be very blurry. If you want hard edges like this, then you want to do it over dry paint. So I'm just kind of dancing around, making a couple areas that are more scribbly and a few areas that are more linear, because a Christmas tree, which is what this one will be, is a little pine tree, it's going to have some of those little pine needles. The little pine boughs can be linear, so scumbling can be linear as well as scribbly. It's just a matter of dancing the brush to make some sort of texture or pattern. And you can see I'm just kind of playing around with what that tree might look like around this Christmas ornament. You can also do this with summer and spring images, any of your flowers that might need a background behind them. Just do a little bit of grasses and weeds and leaves and things behind them by doing some scumbling with, some sort of a really natural looking green color. You can even go in with a darker color and do a second layer, basically glazing scumbling. So you can use a second green on top to add some depth. And here's another way to do some linear scumbling, and this is going to be almost a circular pattern, because when you have ripples in water, it goes around and around the swan. So there's a few of those lines that are drawn here on the stamp. So I'm going to go around those just to get it started and make them very loose around there. I'm not being super tight with it. And then I'm going to take the same paint and I'm just going to go around and continue all the way around the edges and make some sort of scumbly little lines. You want some of them to be very thin, and as they radiate out from something like this, you want them to get thinner and lighter and lighter and thinner. You don't want chunky edges to this kind of scumbling. So you want each stroke to end as it fans out in a very thin stroke. So you'll just lift up your brush as you get to that end, or you can hold it more vertically in order to get a thinner stroke. And like I said, this is a number 2 brush. And these are very tiny stamps. So the number 2 brush is able to give me a very small line that matches the scale of the stamping that I've done. But you can see how well this will create water. You could do this on a lake or on an ocean with any kind of painting that you're doing, any kind of background, and give a really nice watery effect. I'll just get lighter and fainter as it fans out from whatever's causing those ripples. Sometimes those ripples will just be horizontal. All right, so here is the pinnable graphic for this week over on the Ellen Hutson blog. The link is in the description. And I hope you are continuing to make your 2x2 swatches so you can refer to them and remember what we've learned here. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Kemudian kita ada teknik impasto, menggunakan warna secara terus dari tiup dengan menggunakan sapuan pisau pelet untuk mewujudkan kesan warna tebal dan legap.
So this exercise is going to show you how to work in impasto. So let's say, for example, you have a cup. Now the cup is rounded like this, and it's got lines running like that. So basically, this is what we call the internal shape of the cup. And when we do impasto, we want to follow that internal shape. So if, for example, I have a fruit, let's make an apple. So the apple is rounded like this, and it's rounded like this. So when I place the impasto paint down, I almost follow the shape of these little blocks. So I've just got any kind of paint here. So I'm using like a hogshead brush, flat. I'm going to just use any color that I've got. So I'm following the shape of what I see. Now obviously I have to take into account dark and light. I don't have anything in front of me, so I'm just imagining this out of my head. So I can follow the horizontal shape as well as the vertical. So I can, for example, now with my red, say, okay, I want to start putting in a bit of vertical this way. And as you can see, it's short strokes like this. It's not a long stroke. That's scumbling when I do that. If I use a short stroke like this, not longer than the head of the brush, then I'm using impasto. So I can actually follow the shape until I'm happy with what I've got. So that's how you get the roundness of the shape, by following the shape. And you want to see the actual brush strokes, because that is what makes it look interesting. So this is a really bad example of an apple, but you get the idea. So let's make it a little bit more appley. Makes this the shadow. Imagine that's light and this is dark. So it's almost like filling in a bunch of blocks. So you need to imagine in your head how this item, whatever it is broken up into horizontal and vertical lines. And all objects are broken up in horizontal and vertical lines. So what's important to remember is that if this is the light coming from here, the shadow will sit out here, but the shadow sits under the whole thing. So even in that, I'm going to do So the shadow will have this kind of breakup. So I'm just imagining this now out of my head. Short strokes. And you can go over and over, but you always want to leave space in between the strokes so that you can see whatever the bottom stroke was. So you can go many layers, as thick as you want, and you get very interesting effects. You see how it's happening. So there is impasto.
Dan yang terakhir ialah teknik hard edge. Kita gunakan masking tape untuk pisahkan warna agar cat yang kita hasilkan kemaskan.
Hi guys! In this video, I'm going to teach you how to make hard edge paintings using acrylic paint. First, you're going to want to start off by grabbing the materials you'll need. Your paint, a ruler, some gesso, a clear medium, painter's tape, and flat end brushes. I'll be working on masonite board, which I've already gessoed. You can also work on canvas. With the masonite board, I made sure to sand it so that way it'll be nice and smooth and easier for me to work with. First, you'll want to draw the shape you'll be making. Even if it's just practice, it's nice to have an objective as to where you'll want the lines to be. I'm just going to make an easy triangle. Taking the painter's tape, or you can also use masking tape for this. If it's just practice, that should be fine, but it does have a tendency to bleed more, whereas painter tape would be the ideal one to use. Place the tape where you want the lines to be, and then make sure that you burnish or smooth down the edges of the tape using your finger or a nail so it's flat and flush with the surface. This is important so that none of the paint that you'll be applying will be able to get under it. You're applying the gesso using, again, a flat-ended brush right into the tape line, so that way the gesso might seep through the tape. If anything's going to seep through, you're going to want it to be the gesso instead of the paint you're using. It's much better to have this seep through the tape, so that way there'll be no room for the new color you'll be adding to seep through as you bleed the line. Once your entire image is covered, wait for it to dry. You know that gesso is dry if it's room temperature. If it's still cool to the touch, then that means it's still wet. To speed up the drying process at any time, you can try using a hair dryer. It's recommended that you use it on low, otherwise it may warp the board you're using or it might make the tape too sticky and difficult to remove. Once you know that your gesso is dry, it's time to take a flat-ended brush and start to apply your paint. It's important to start on the tape and pull away from it. There are two techniques you can do to filling in your shape. Either what I'm doing here and an even flat coat, or doing a thick application of the paint. If I find later on that my coat isn't as opaque as I'd like, I might wait for it to dry and then reapply the red paint before removing the tape. If you're mixing your colors, make a point of making extra and storing them in some aluminum foil so they won't dry out and you'll have them for later on if you need to fix anything. We're going to want to make sure that our paint is dry. Once it is, we're able to do the fun part, which is removing the tape. Pull out the tape from the corner and then pull it away at an angle. Remove all the tape and you can check out your hard work. It looks like our triangle looks pretty good. Lots of crisp, clean edges. Now that we've gotten one image down, it's time to work using a second image. I'm going to start by drawing off a simple shape and again applying the painter's tape. Making sure to burnish my edges down flat to the board. My shape overlaps with another color. I'm not able to use the gesso this time. This is because if I use gesso to seep under, it'll get onto my newly created red triangle, which isn't what I want. Instead of using gesso, use a clear medium, such as a gel medium, to bleed underneath your tape. The medium should dry clear, so if it does bleed under, it won't be noticeable. It'll be especially not noticeable if you do a varnish over top of everything. If you're not planning on doing a varnish, however, it's best to keep your medium a matte. Once your medium's fully dry, now we get to apply our new color of paint. Here you're going to want to make sure that you've considered the paint opacity. In this example, I'm using blue paint on top of the red. If I was to use yellow instead, the red triangle would show up a lot easier, but since the blue is darker, it's able to cover the lighter color. It looks like our images turned out great. It's important to remember that hard edge painting requires you spend a lot of time on it, so make sure that you don't rush and you're patient when working. It's also important that you take the protective coats, such as the gesso and the clear medium, seriously. It's a lot easier to do this the first time than to have to try to fix something later. If you're interested in learning any more about these different techniques, one of the videos I would definitely recommend watching would be the Golden Painting Series. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching and best of luck with your paintings in the future.
Itu saja daripada saya. Sekian, terima kasih.